Hey everyone, tonight we're going to take a dizzying leap back in time, not to some grand battlefield or a bustling royal court, but to something far more intimate, far more fundamental, the very first bite of ice cream. Imagine, if you can, a world where the sensation of frozen sweetness simply doesn't exist. You live in a London that smells of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and horse dung. The streets are a muddy, cobbled mess, teeming with vendors, hawking oysters, hot pies, and watery ale. Your teeth are probably a bit gnarly, and your concept of clean is, shall we say, fluid. You might have seen snow, yes, but that was a cold, tasteless nuisance, not something you'd willingly put in your mouth, let alone eat for pleasure. Now picture a dessert, not warm custard, not a spiced apple, but something chillingly, shockingly cold, yet smooth and sweet. Your modern palate, pampered by freezer aisles and endless flavors, simply isn't equipped for the sheer jolt this would deliver. In fact, you probably won't survive the mental adjustment required to truly grasp this culinary revolution. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, please like and follow the channel to continue waiting for the next exciting parts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle along the cobbled streets of 1700s London, a chill wind whipping your threadbare cloak. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and a faint, persistent tang of the Thames. Your stomach rumbles, accustomed to a diet of gruel-tough bread and perhaps a bit of salted meat if you're fortunate. The concept of a frozen dessert, a creamy, sugary delight that melts on the tongue, is not just alien, it's utterly fantastical. Your world is one of warmth, warm ale, warm stews, the welcome heat of a sputtering fireplace. Cold is a sensation to be endured, to be shielded against. The thought of deliberately ingesting something intensely cold is, quite frankly, a bit mad. Yet rumors persist, whispers from the continent, carried by returning merchants and flamboyant aristocrats, of a mysterious confection known as iced cream. This isn't just about a new food item. It's about a complete reorientation of your sensory experience. Your tongue, accustomed to the dull warmth of everyday fare, is about to encounter a shockwave of frigidity. Imagine the jolt the brain frees before you even process the taste. Historians still argue whether the initial shock of cold or the unfamiliar sweetness was more jarring for early tasters. It's a debate that highlights just how fundamentally different their culinary landscape was from our own. You've never had a truly cold drink, not one that wasn't fresh from a well, perhaps, but certainly not one that was intentionally made frigid. Ice for you is something that makes winter miserable, or perhaps keeps a fish from spoiling for a precious few hours. It's certainly not something you desire to eat. The idea of preserving anything with cold, let alone creating a delicacy from it, is a logistical nightmare in your time. There are no freezers humming quietly in the corner, no ice cube trays in your kitchen. The very notion of ice cream relies on a concept that is revolutionary for the 18th century, the controlled manipulation of extreme cold. This cold isn't natural, it's manufactured, or at least captured and contained. Consider the effort. You probably haven't even seen a piece of ice outside of the deepest winter months, and even then it melts quickly into dirty puddles. The very foundation of this iced cream is built upon an infrastructure of human labor and ingenuity that is almost invisible to your modern eye. Think about the ingredients. Sugar, for one. It's not the ubiquitous white powder you find in every household today. Here in the 1700s, sugar is a luxury, a symbol of immense wealth, often imported from distant colonial plantations under brutal conditions. A spoonful of sugar is a small fortune. To waste it on something as ephemeral as a frozen treat seems almost sacrilegious to the practical, penny-pinching mindset of the common person. And cream, fresh, rich cream, is also a perishable commodity, a sign of a well-stocked larder, not something to be chilled, to an unnatural stiffness. One quirky tidbit is that early recipes often called for specific rich Jersey or Guernsey cream prized for its fat content, which helped prevent excessive iciness. The sheer expense of the components alone puts this iced cream far beyond the reach of all but the most elite. You, a humble citizen of London, are light years away from ever encountering such an extravagance. Your world, dear listener, is about to be turned upside down by a spoon and a frozen curiosity. Your 1700s eyes dart around, taking in the raw reality of a city without modern conveniences. And here in this world, the idea of Cuisine itself is fraught with difficulty. It's not just cold, it's a precious fleeting commodity. Imagine needing ice not for a fleeting moment, but to create a sustained intense chill for hours on end. Where would you get it? From frozen ponds and rivers, of course, but that's only during the brutal grip of winter, and once harvested, how do you keep it? You certainly don't have a sub-zero in your scullery. The process of acquiring and preserving ice in the 18th century was an epic undertaking, a feat of logistics and brute force. During the harshest winter months, when ponds froze solid enough to bear the weight of men and tools, the ice harvest would begin. You might witness gangs of laborers bundled in rough wool venturing onto the treacherous cracking surfaces of frozen lakes and rivers. They wield massive saws, sometimes powered by horses, to cut enormous blocks of ice blocks that could weigh hundreds of pounds. It's dangerous backbreaking work with the constant threat of falling through the ice into the frigid depths below. Historians still argue whether the risk of drowning or the sheer physical exhaustion was the greater peril for ice harvesters. It's a testament to the value placed on this frozen resource that anyone would undertake such a task. Once cut, these behemoth blocks weren't simply carted off in a wagon. They had to be transported with incredible speed and care to minimize melting. Picture the scene: huge horse-drawn carts, often insulated with straw or sawdust, rumbling through the snow-covered countryside, each block a ticking clock of diminishing returns. The destination: not a humble kitchen, but a specially constructed ice house. These were engineering marvels of their time, essentially insulated pits or cellars, often conical in shape, and partially underground, designed to keep ice frozen well into the warmer months. They were meticulously lined with straw sawdust or even ash for insulation, and equipped with drainage systems to carry away meltwater. You might hear tales of wealthy landowners boasting about the size and efficiency of their ice houses, a true status symbol. Maintaining one was an ongoing chore. You needed someone dedicated to continually checking the insulation, clearing meltwater, and ensuring no warm air seeped in. It was a constant battle against nature, a perpetual effort to cheat the inevitable thaw. One quirky tidbit is that some ice houses were designed with elaborate ventilation shafts that would draw in cold air during winter nights and circulate it, a passive form of refrigeration. The very air you breathe, in fact, could be a threat to the precious ice stored within these subterranean chambers. The quality of the ice itself was also a concern. River ice could be murky, full of sediment, or even detritus. Pond ice might be cleaner, but still not pristine. It was certainly not the crystal-clear filtered ice you're accustomed to. This meant that any iced cream would inherently carry the subtle, earthy taint of its frozen source. There's no sanitary ice machine spitting out perfect cubes here. Every piece of ice has a story, often a grimy one, of its perilous journey from frozen pond to insulated pit. The sheer cost and effort involved in simply obtaining and storing the necessary cold fire makes the eventual creation of ice cream feel almost miraculous, a fleeting triumph over the laws of nature. This wasn't just a dessert, it was a demonstration of power, a defiant gesture against the limitations of the age. You stand amidst the bustling docks, the air thick with the smell of tar and exotic spices, and you begin to grasp the second crucial and equally expensive component of this nascent iced cream: sugar stuckdom. Today, sugar is so commonplace, so cheap, that you barely register its cost. But in the 1700s, it was a luxury, a symbol of immense wealth and global power. It was quite literally white gold. The journey of sugar from cane field to your hypothetical dessert was long, brutal, and fraught with peril. You understand perhaps dimly that this sweetness comes from distant lands, the Caribbean, Brazil, the Americas. You might see ships arriving their holds laden with hogsheads of raw, unrefined sugar, often dark and coarse, a far cry from the sparkling white granules you know. This isn't just a commodity. It's the product of immense human suffering. Historians still argue whether the moral implications of sugar production were truly acknowledged by the consumers of the era, or if the desire for sweetness simply overshadowed all else. It's an uncomfortable truth woven into the very fabric of this emerging delicacy. Once it arrived in England, this raw sugar had to undergo further processing. It was refined in sugar houses, often dangerous, hot and dusty places where workers toiled to purify the crystals, turning the dark, sticky mass into progressively whiter, finer grades. The whiter the sugar, the more refined, and thus the more expensive and prestigious it became. To use such a precious ingredient in a dessert that would simply melt away, rather than be baked into a storable cake or preserved fruit, was an act of conspicuous consumption, a flamboyant display of wealth. Imagine the cost. A single pound of refined sugar could be worth more than a week's wages for a common laborer. To sweeten a large batch of iced cream would require pounds of it. This isn't just a dash, it's a significant investment. Every spoonful of this frozen treat is in essence a spoonful of pure, concentrated affluence. It speaks volumes about the status of the person serving it and the importance of the occasion. You wouldn't just whip up a batch of ice cream on a whim. It would be for a grand celebration, a statement. Beyond its cost, sugar also held a certain mystique. It was seen not just as a sweetener, but as a medicine, a preservative, and even a spice. Confectioners, who were the early pioneers of ice cream, were often seen as alchemists transforming raw ingredients into wondrous, often elaborate creations. The very act of crystallizing sugar into various forms was considered an art. One quirky tidbit is that early sugar loaves, the cone-shaped blocks in which refined sugar was sold, were so hard that they often had to be broken with special sugar nippers, making precise measurement a challenge. This added another layer of difficulty to the already complex process of making ice cream. The sheer volume of sugar required for ice cream also meant that it was an indulgence for the truly wealthy. The average person might use a small amount of honey or molasses to sweeten their meager fare, but refined sugar was almost unheard of in their daily diet. This stark contrast further emphasizes the exclusivity of ice cream. It wasn't just a treat, it was a declaration of social standing, a taste of a world utterly separate from the one you inhabit. The sweetness, when it finally hits your tongue, won't just be a flavor. It will be the taste of global trade, immense labor, and unimaginable expense. As you wander through the labyrinthine alleys of 18th century London, the air thick with the murmur of 1,000 languages and dialects, you might catch whispers of something truly revolutionary, originating from a land known for its art and culinary innovation: Italy. It's here in the sun-drenched cities of Florence, Venice, and Rome that the concept of chaque iced creams truly began to solidify long before it trickled down to the damp streets of England. These weren't just frozen drinks, they were the nascent forms of what you now recognize as ice cream, a delightful blend of rich dairy sugar and chilling temperatures. The Italians, with their long tradition of elaborate banquets and sophisticated desserts, were uniquely poised to experiment with such an idea. They had access to ice and snow from the mountains, and their natural penchant for theatricality meant they were always looking for new ways to astound and delight their guests. You might hear tales of famous Italian chefs, or gelatieri, who guarded their recipes with fierce secrecy, passing them down through generations as precious family heirlooms. These were not mere cooks. They were culinary alchemists, transforming simple ingredients into something magical. Historians still argue whether Catherine de' Medici truly introduced ice cream to France when she married Henry II in 1533, or if the concept arrived later through other Italian influences. It's a debate that underscores the slow, almost mythical diffusion of this new food across Europe. The whispers you hear aren't just about the taste, they're about the presentation. Imagine a magnificent Italian villa bathed in candlelight, where amidst silver platters and crystal goblets, servants bring forth shimmering molded desserts. These early iced creams were often shaped into fantastical forms, fruits, flowers, even miniature architectural marvels, thanks to intricate pewter molds. This wasn't just food, it was edible art designed to elicit gasps of admiration from noble guests. The very idea of eating something so beautiful, knowing it would melt and vanish, added to its allure and mystique. Your English sensibilities, however, might be a bit skeptical. The idea of deliberately freezing milk and sugar might strike you as odd, even unhealthy. There's a natural suspicion of anything too new, too foreign. What strange concoction is this? You might ponder, accustomed to your robust puddings and savory pies. The concept of a dessert that actively cools the palate rather than warming it is counterintuitive to your culinary upbringing. Yet there's an undeniable fascination, a curiosity that piques even the most traditional mind. One quirky tidbit is that some early Italian iced creams were more akin to sorbets or granitas, relying heavily on fruit juices and snow before dairy was consistently incorporated. This progression from simpler frozen concoctions to the richer, creamier versions highlights a slow evolution driven by experimentation and the increasing availability of key ingredients. The initial concept might have been a refreshing icy treat, but the addition of rich cream and precious sugar elevated it to something truly decadent. You stand on the precipice of a culinary revolution as these exotic whispers from Italy begin to coalesce into something tangible, something that will in time utterly transform the world of desserts. The journey has just begun, and the first taste is still a distant yet tantalizing promise. You find yourself in the hushed, gilded corridors of a grand English manor far removed from the clamor of the streets. This is where the nascent concept of iced cream truly took root in Britain behind the locked doors and velvet ropes of the elite. This wasn't a dessert for the masses, not yet. It was an exclusive luxury. A secret indulgence whispered about in drawing rooms and served only at the most opulent gatherings. To even know of its existence was a sign of your social standing. Imagine the scene. You're a guest at a duke's dinner party surrounded by shimmering silks, polished silver, and the faint scent of expensive perfumes. The conversation flows punctuated by polite laughter and clinking glasses. Course after course is served roasts, elaborate puddings, exotic fruits. Then, with an almost reverent hush, the servants bring forth something utterly new, something that elicits gasps of surprise and hushed murmurs of excitement. This is your first glimpse of iced cream, arriving not as a simple dish, but as a spectacle. It might be presented in ornate silver bowls, nestled in beds of crushed ice, the very ice you imagined being harvested with such peril. Or perhaps it's molded into an astonishing shape, a miniature pineapple or a perfect rose, thanks to the intricate molds that only the wealthiest households could commission. The sheer artistry involved in its presentation alone signifies its elite status. This is less about hunger and more about astonishment, about demonstrating the host's boundless wealth and access to the most cutting-edge culinary trends. The rarity of this treat added to its allure. Only a handful of chefs in England possess the knowledge and skill to make it, often having trained in Italy or France. They were highly sought after, commanding exorbitant wages, their expertise as guarded as state secrets. The equipment, too, was specialized and expensive. The double-chambered pewter or tin pots, the wooden buckets the rock salt needed to lower the ice's freezing point. You wouldn't find these tools in any common kitchen. Historians still argue whether the initial secrecy around ice cream recipes was driven more by a desire to maintain exclusivity or by a genuine fear of failure, given the temperamental nature of early techniques. You notice the reactions around you. Some guests approach it with cautious curiosity, taking a tiny spoonful, their eyes widening at the unfamiliar cold and sweetness. Others, perhaps more adventurous or already clued into this fashionable new dessert, dive in with eager anticipation. It's a conversation starter, a novelty that sparks wonder and envy. The hostess basks in the reflected glory of her culinary triumph, knowing that this single dish will be the talk of London society for weeks to come. One quirky tidbit is that some of the earliest ice cream recipes were often printed in cookbooks specifically aimed at aristocratic households, reinforcing its image as an exclusive indulgence. These cookbooks weren't found in general circulation. They were expensive, beautifully bound volumes themselves, objects of luxury. You, a commoner, would never lay eyes on such a book, let alone taste its contents. The world of iced cream is for now utterly beyond your grasp, a tantalizing glimpse into a life of unimaginable extravagance. You watch as a lady delicately brings a spoon to her lips, her expression a mix of delight and surprise, and you can only wonder at the sensation she's experiencing. The hushed anticipation in the grand dining hall is palpable. You, as an unseen observer, witness a truly historic moment, the first royal taste of this bewildering new dessert. Imagine the scene at a banquet hosted by King George I or II, a grand affair perhaps in a palace like Kensington or Hampton Court. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meats, expensive wines, and the subtle perfume of powdered wigs. Hundreds of candles cast a flickering glow on velvet and brocade, on silver and crystal. The meal has progressed through numerous courses, each more elaborate than the last, designed to impress and delight. But then a subtle shift in the atmosphere occurs. Servants moving with practiced grace bring forth platters that seem to shimmer with an ethereal coldness. You lean in, your curiosity piqued, as the new dessert is unveiled. It's not just presented, it's introduced, almost formally, as if it were a new dignitary. This is not simply food, it's a culinary event. The king himself, a figure of immense authority and often immense appetite, is presented with a small, exquisite portion. Perhaps it's a perfectly sculpted mound or a delicate rosette shimmering faintly under the candlelight. He eyes it with a mixture of royal prerogative and genuine curiosity. Is it a trick, a new form of culinary art? His courtiers watch their expressions, a mix of awe and mimicry, ready to reflect the monarch's reaction. You observe as the king, with a ponderous hand, lifts a silver spoon, perhaps hesitating for a moment. This is a leap of faith, a departure from the warm, familiar flavors of his usual repast. He takes a tiny, tentative spoonful, bringing it to his lips. And then the reaction. It's not an explosion of delight, not yet. It's a moment of surprise, perhaps a slight recoil from the unfamiliar cold. His brow might furrow for an instant, a flicker of bewilderment crossing his regal features. Then, as the initial shock subsides, the sweetness and creaminess register. A slow, almost imperceptible nod of approval. This cautious acceptance, this royal imprimatur, is everything. It signals to the entire court, and by extension to the wealthiest echelons of society, that iced cream is not merely a novelty, but a desirable, fashionable treat. The ripple effect is immediate. If it's good enough for the king, it's certainly good enough for the nobility. Historians still argue whether royal endorsement was the primary catalyst for ice cream's spread among the aristocracy, or if its inherent novelty would have ensured its popularity anyway. One quirky tidbit about these early royal banquets is that the ice cream was often served in small individual silver or porcelain cups, indicating its preciousness and preventing it from melting too quickly. Imagine the logistical nightmare of chilling hundreds of these delicate dishes simultaneously. It was a performance as much as a meal, showcasing the household's wealth, the chef's ingenuity, and the sheer audacity of serving something so utterly modern. You see the king take another slightly less hesitant spoonful, and a tiny, satisfied smile plays on his lips. The revolution, dear listener, has just received its royal blessing. With royal approval, now secured, the challenge shifts from introduction to creation. You now enter the stifling heat of a grand kitchen far removed from the elegant dining hall and witness the laborious, almost primitive methods behind the making of iced cream. This is not the gentle hum of a modern ice cream maker. This is the churn's genesis. A testament to human ingenuity born of necessity and desire. Imagine a large wooden bucket, perhaps a repurposed butter churn, standing in the center of the kitchen. Inside this larger bucket sits a smaller, often pewter or tin cylinder. This inner cylinder is where the magic and the misery truly happens. The space between the two containers is packed with layers of crushed ice and, crucially, rock salt. This mixture, a simple yet effective scientific principle, significantly lowers the freezing point of the ice, allowing it to draw heat more aggressively from the contents of the inner cylinder. Your senses are assaulted by the sounds, the dull thud of a pestle crushing ice, the rhythmic scraping of metal on metal, and the groans of the kitchen staff. For hours, sometimes an entire afternoon, a strong, often weary scullery maid or footman would be tasked with the relentless churning. Their arm would move in a steady circular motion, rotating the inner cylinder within the icy brine. This constant movement is essential. Without it, the mixture would simply freeze into a solid, unappetizing block of ice. The churning aerates the cream-incorporating air to give it that coveted smoother texture and prevents large ice crystals from forming. It's an exhausting, monotonous task. Sweat beads on the brow of the churner despite the chilling effect of the ice and salt. Their muscles ache, their shoulders burn. There are no electric motors here, no automatic timers. The success of the iced cream hinges entirely on the diligence and endurance of this one person. Historians still argue whether early churns were truly effective at creating a smooth consistency or if many batches were more akin to coarse granita. It highlights the constant struggle against the limitations of the era's technology. You might see the chef, a stern and often temperamental figure, occasionally peering into the inner cylinder, testing the consistency, with a spoon offering sharp critiques or rare words of encouragement. The precise moment to stop churning is critical, a skill learned only through endless trial and error. Too little churning, and it's icy and separates. Too much, and it could become overly stiff or even turn to butter. One quirky tidbit is that some ingenious early churns incorporated a crank system, slightly easing the physical burden, but these were rare and expensive innovations. For most households, the churn was a simple hand-crank device, or even just a pot manually rotated within a larger basin of ice and salt. The sheer amount of human energy poured into each batch of ice cream makes it even more precious, a true testament to the luxury it represented. You watch mesmerized by the sheer physicality of the process, realizing that every delectable spoonful enjoyed in the dining hall comes at the cost of unseen labor and aching muscles. With the churning underway, the next grand challenge in your 18th century kitchen is flavoring the unfamiliar. Okay? Today, your spoiled four-choice vanilla bean-salted caramel pistachio mint chocolate chip. The list is endless. But back then, the palette was far more limited, and the available flavorings were often either incredibly expensive, surprisingly exotic, or simply well weird by modern standards. The very concept of adding taste to this cold, creamy base was an experiment. The most common and certainly most prized flavor was vanilla. However, vanilla beans were an incredibly rare and costly import primarily from Mexico, requiring a complex and lengthy curing process. Imagine the chef carefully slicing open a precious vanilla pod, scraping out the tiny black seeds, each one a minuscule fortune. This wasn't a cheap extract poured from a bottle. It was a potent aromatic spice used sparingly and with immense reverence. The rich, warm notes of vanilla would have been a startling counterpoint to the intense cold, creating a truly luxurious sensation. Beyond vanilla, the available options often reflected the tastes of the era, which leaned heavily towards floral and herbal notes. You might see recipes calling for rosewater or orange blossom water, delicate essences that would imbue the cream with a subtle perfumed quality. These weren't just for scent, they were integral to the flavor profile. Imagine a spoonful of ice cream tasting faintly of a summer garden, an experience utterly alien to your modern taste buds, which crave bold, distinct flavors. Historians still argue whether these floral flavors were genuinely preferred or if they were simply the most readily available and exotic options for the wealthy. Fruits, when available and in season, were also used, though their integration was more challenging. Fresh berries, peaches, or apricots would be crushed and folded in their natural sweetness and acidity, cutting through the richness of the cream. But remember, refrigeration is virtually non-existent, so fresh fruit was a fleeting luxury. Spices, too, played a role. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and even ginger could be grated into the mixture, offering a warm counterpoint to the chill. One quirky tidbit is that some very early ice cream recipes included ingredients like ambergris, a waxy substance from sperm whale intestines prized for its musky, sweet aroma, or civet, a secretion from a civet cat used as a fixative in perfumes. While these were undoubtedly niche and incredibly expensive, they highlight the era's adventurous, sometimes bizarre approach to flavor and luxury. Imagine a dessert with a hint of whale secretion, quite the palate cleanser. These weren't mainstream, thank goodness, but they existed in the experimental fringes of aristocratic kitchens. The process of infusing these flavors was meticulous. Often the cream would be steeped with the chosen aromatics, then strained before churning to ensure a smooth, unblemished consistency. Every step was a delicate dance, an art form perfected by master confectioners. The result was not just a sweet treat, but a complex sensory experience, a blend of cold cream and the finest, most exotic flavors money could buy in the 1700s. Your tongue, accustomed to the artificial intensity of modern flavorings, would be stunned by the subtle yet profound notes in this historical ice cream. As the churning continues, the greatest challenge for the 18th century chef and the aspiring ice cream connoisseur emerges: texture troubles. Forget the perfectly smooth, scoopable, almost elastic consistency you expect from your favorite pint today. Early ice cream was a far less refined beast, often prone to a granular, icy, or even somewhat greasy mouthfeel. Achieving anything akin to modern creaminess was a battle against the very laws of physics, given the primitive tools at hand. You watch as the churner painstakingly scrapes down the sides of the inner container, trying to incorporate the freezing layers back into the still liquid center. The goal is to prevent large ice crystals from forming. When water freezes slowly, its molecules have time to align into distinct, often brittle crystals. This is why a simple frozen block of sugar water would feel like biting into a gritty ice cube. The constant churning, while exhausting, was designed precisely to agitate the mixture, breaking up these crystals as they formed and attempting to keep them microscopic. However, even with diligent churning, the results were highly inconsistent. One batch might be delightfully smooth. The next, from the same recipe and effort, could be riddled with icy shards. This variability was a constant source of frustration for chefs and a gamble for consumers. Historians still argue whether the perceived grittiness of early ice cream was simply accepted as part of its novelty, or if it was a genuine flaw that limited its wider appeal. Your modern palate, accustomed to the smooth, almost velvety texture of contemporary ice cream, would likely be quite surprised, perhaps even a little put off by the often coarser reality of its ancestor. The fat content of the cream played a crucial role here, too. Recipes often called for the richest available cream, sometimes even adding egg yolks, not just for flavor, but for their emulsifying properties. Fat helps to keep ice crystals small and contributes to a smoother mouthfeel. But too much fat or improper churning could lead to a greasy rather than creamy texture, leaving an unpleasant film in your mouth. Remember that specific Jersey cream mentioned earlier, it was sought after precisely for its higher fat content, which offered a better chance at preventing an overly icy product. One quirky tidbit is that confectioners sometimes added gum arabic or gum tragacanth natural plant gums to their ice cream mixtures. These acted as stabilizers, helping to prevent the formation of large ice crystals and creating a smoother, more stable product, much like modern stabilizers in industrial ice cream. This shows an early understanding of food science, albeit through trial and error, as chefs desperately sought ways to improve their temperamental creation. Despite these efforts, the texture of 18th century ice cream was a constant reminder of its nascent stage. It was a marvel, yes, but a flawed one. Each spoonful was a gamble, a test of the chef's skill and the consumer's tolerance for the unexpected. You can almost feel the slight grittiness on your tongue, the lingering chill, a texture that tells a story of tireless effort and imperfect science a world away from the perfectly consistent scoops you now take for granted. Now that the enigmatic iced cream is being carefully prepared in the unseen depths of the kitchen, let's step back into the opulent dining room where you, the observer, feel the full force of a social scrutiny. Surrounding its consumption, this isn't just about eating. It's a performance, a delicate dance of etiquette and judgment, especially when faced with something so utterly novel. Imagine holding that delicate silver spoon poised above a shimmering mound of frozen cream. Your eyes dart around the room. Are you holding it correctly? Is your posture refined enough? You're keenly aware that every move, every expression is being observed. The very act of eating this new, expensive, and temperamental dessert becomes a public display of your sophistication or lack thereof. For the guests, particularly those from the old guard, there might be a subtle air of suspicion. Is this really proper? Is it healthy? You might hear hushed remarks about foreign novelties or unnatural chill. The young fashionable set, however, would embrace it with performative enthusiasm, eager to demonstrate their modernity and willingness to embrace new trends. To show disdain for the iced cream could be seen as provincial, while overly boisterous enjoyment might be considered unrefined. Historians still argue whether the initial embrace of ice cream by the English aristocracy was genuine culinary appreciation or primarily a matter of social one-upmanship. The sheer difficulty of eating it gracefully adds to the tension. Remember, this isn't the stable, scoopable ice cream of today. It might be slightly icy or melt far too quickly, threatening to drip onto your expensive silk waistcoat or lace collar. The pressure to consume it elegantly without making a mess or betraying any signs of discomfort from the intense cold would be immense. A poorly managed bite could lead to a minor social faux pas, a fleeting moment of embarrassment that would be remembered and perhaps gossiped about later. You'd also be acutely aware of the cost barrier inherent in this dish. Every spoonful is a silent declaration of the host's immense wealth. To waste even a drop or to visibly struggle with it would be seen as disrespectful to the effort and expense involved. The portion sizes would likely be small, further emphasizing its preciousness and encouraging a slow, deliberate enjoyment rather than gluttonous consumption. One quirky tidbit is that some etiquette guides of the era might have subtly advised on how to approach new or unusual dishes like ice cream, emphasizing politeness and moderation over overt expressions of surprise or distaste. This highlights the pressure to maintain composure and sophistication even when confronted with a culinary shock. So as you finally bring that shimmering spoonful to your lips, you're not just tasting ice cream, you're tasting the intricate web of 18th century social rules, navigating the subtle currents of approval and judgment that flow through the aristocratic dining room. Your own reaction, carefully controlled, becomes part of the performance. Stepping away from the dining room's social pressures, you now plunge into the world of 18th century medical beliefs, a realm where the new iced cream sparked genuine alarm. This was a time of limited scientific understanding, where bodily humors and ancient theories held sway, leading to widespread health hysteria around anything as unnaturally cold as ice cream. Imagine the prevailing medical advice: avoid cold drinks, especially after eating hot food. The stomach was seen as a delicate furnace, easily extinguished or shocked by sudden temperature changes. To deliberately introduce something ice-cold into it was considered by many learned physicians an act of sheer folly, almost certainly leading to dire consequences. You might overhear conversations about chilling the blood, stagnating digestion, or even worse, causing apoplexy, a sudden, often fatal stroke. Popular wisdom, often based on anecdotal evidence and centuries-old superstitions, reinforced these fears. People believed that consuming cold foods could cause everything from toothaches and fevers to more serious ailments like colic paralysis or even sudden death. The idea of cooling humors sounded benign, but in a body believed to be in a delicate balance, any drastic shift in temperature was viewed with extreme suspicion. Historians still argue whether these health warnings were genuine concerns based on observation or merely a reflection of the era's general distrust of novelty and foreign culinary practices. You might see guests at that grand banquet, even after the king's cautious approval, hesitate before taking a second spoonful. Their enjoyment would be tinged with a nagging fear, a lingering doubt about the wisdom of indulging in such a frigid treat. Perhaps a gentleman would discreetly pat his stomach afterwards, convinced he felt a slight chill, taking hold, a precursor to some impending illness. There were no clinical trials, no scientific studies to prove or disprove these anxieties. Only the pronouncements of physicians and the weight of tradition. Jacadiem. One quirky tidbit is that some physicians actually prescribed ice cream as a remedy for certain conditions, particularly fevers, believing that its coldness could quench the internal heat. This contradictory advice highlights the lack of a unified scientific understanding and the experimental nature of medicine at the time. So while some warned of its dangers, others saw its potential as a therapeutic agent, adding to the confusion around this strange new food. The very novelty of ice cream, its stark difference from all other known foods, made it a prime target for medical suspicion. It defied the established culinary norms, and thus, by extension, seemed to defy the established rules of health. To try ice cream for the first time in the 1700s wasn't just a taste adventure. It was a daring act, a silent defiance of prevailing medical wisdom, a culinary gamble with your very well-being. And as you watch someone delicately brave a spoonful, you can almost hear the imaginary warnings of their family doctor ringing in their ears. You are now firmly ensconced in the pressure cooker of an aristocratic kitchen, where the spotlight paradoxically shines brightest on the one person who toils unseen, the head chef. For this culinary artisan, the arrival of iced cream was not just a new recipe, it was an immense and constant chef's burden. Their reputation, and indeed their very employment, often hinged on the perfection of this temperamental dish. Imagine the chef, perhaps a formidable French or Italian maître de cuisine, pacing nervously, his starched toque barely concealing the worry etched on his face. He is not merely cooking, he is orchestrating a complex, time-sensitive operation. The logistics are mind-boggling, ensuring a continuous supply of precious ice from the ice house, obtaining the finest cream and rarest sugar, managing a small army of kitchen staff, and above all, battling the capricious nature of early ice cream making. The pressure to perform is immense. If the iced cream fails, if it's too icy, too watery, too greasy, or simply melts before it reaches the table, it's not just a minor disappointment. It's a social disaster for the host and a professional catastrophe for the chef. A ruined batch could cost a fortune in wasted ingredients and, more importantly, severely damage the chef's standing. They might even face dismissal, a swift end to their lucrative career. Historians still argue whether the high turnover of chefs in aristocratic households was due more to such culinary failures or to the general demanding nature of the role. This burden extended beyond mere technical skill. The chef was also an innovator, constantly experimenting, trying to refine the process, tweak the recipes, and find new ways to stabilize and flavor the cream. They might spend sleepless nights pondering how to prevent larger ice crystals or how to maintain the perfect churning rhythm. There were no culinary schools with set curricula for ice cream. It was all trial and error, learned through painstaking effort and shared secrets among a very small elite group of confectioners. You might see the chef armed with a thermometer, a relatively new and often unreliable instrument at the time, frantically trying to gauge the precise temperature of the brine, or meticulously weighing out every precious grain of sugar. Every decision, every tiny adjustment carries enormous weight. They are masters of their domain, but this particular creation pushes their mastery to its absolute limits. One quirky tidbit is that some chefs desperate for consistent results would even incorporate exotic birds' nests into their recipes, believing the gelatinous properties would aid in smoothness and stability. While scientifically dubious, it illustrates the lengths to which they would go to overcome the texture troubles. The chef's life was a delicate balance between artistic vision and practical execution, a high-wire act performed for the discerning palates of the aristocracy. And with each batch of iced cream, you sense the immense weight of expectation resting squarely on their shoulders. Having witnessed the arduous journey from icy pond to royal palate, you now sense a subtle yet profound shift in the air. The iced cream is no longer just a whispered curiosity or a guarded secret of the elite. Slowly, tentatively, you hear whispers of revolution. Not a political uprising, but a quiet culinary one, as this sweet sensation begins its hesitant spread beyond the immediate royal circles and into the slightly less exalted, though still wealthy strata of society. It starts with the ripples from those grand banquets. Guests who attended the king's table return to their own estates, eager to emulate the latest royal fashion. They demand their own chefs, sometimes with limited success, to recreate this marvel. The demand creates a small burgeoning industry for skilled confectioners. Those who had trained under the few masters now find themselves in high demand, their expertise becoming slightly less secret, though still fiercely guarded. You might overhear conversations in coffee houses, the burgeoning centers of information and gossip in 18th century London, about this new iced cream. While most citizens still couldn't dream of tasting it, the idea of it begins to permeate the public consciousness. It becomes a topic of fascination, a symbol of extreme luxury and modern taste. People discuss it with awe, recounting exaggerated tales of its beauty and expense. This widespread discussion, even among those who would never experience it, plays a crucial role in building its mystique and desirability. The expansion isn't rapid or widespread. It's a slow, painstaking crawl, primarily limited to the very wealthy who possess the means for ice houses, expensive ingredients, and skilled labor. You might see a slightly less grand townhouse belonging to a prosperous merchant or a rising gentry family attempting to serve iced cream at their own functions. Their efforts might be less polished than the royal courts, the texture perhaps a little icier, the presentation less extravagant. but the ambition is there. Historians still argue whether the invention of the sorbetière, a simpler hand-cranked freezer, played a more significant role in this early spread than improved ice harvesting techniques. The sorbetière, while still requiring ice and salt, made the churning process slightly more efficient and accessible, even if only to a slightly broader segment of the elite. This subtle technological advancement, however incremental, was a key factor in moving ice cream from being almost exclusively a royal prerogative to merely a highly aristocratic one. One quirky tidbit is that some of the earliest advertisements for confectioners specializing in iced creams began to appear in London newspapers, albeit targeting a very affluent readership. These weren't mass-market ads. They were discreet announcements in society pages catering to those who were already in the know. This gentle nudge into the public sphere, however limited, marks a crucial step in ice cream's journey from a culinary unicorn to a coveted, albeit still exclusive delicacy. The revolution, while silent and slow, is undoubtedly gaining momentum, spoonful by precious spoonful. From the hushed drawing rooms of the aristocracy, the sweet scent of revolution now drifts, albeit faintly, into the public sphere. You find yourself amidst a bustling summer fair, or a grand garden party, a rare occasion where the common folk and the gentry might mingle, and you catch the public's first glimpse of this fabled iced cream. It's not for tasting, not yet, but merely for beholding a tantalizing vision that sparks intense curiosity and fuels the whispers of its legendary status. Imagine a meticulously arranged stall, perhaps at Vauxhall Gardens or a similar pleasure ground, guarded by liveried servants. Under a canopy, perhaps nestled on a pristine white tablecloth, sit elegant silver bowls or elaborate glass dishes. Within them, shimmering faintly in the filtered sunlight, are mounds of something utterly alien, frozen colored cream, perhaps shaped into miniature fruit or delicate flowers. It's an exhibit, a demonstration of the incredible, rather than an item for sale to the general populace. Crowds gather, craning their necks, eyes wide with wonder. They've heard the rumors, the exaggerated tales of its expense and rarity, but to see it, to witness its cool, solid form defying the summer heat, is a different matter entirely. You hear gasps of astonishment, murmurs of disbelief. "It's frozen cream," they say, one person whispers. "Impossible," retorts another. The very idea that cream could be held in such a state out of a winter's chill is almost beyond comprehension. The display serves a dual purpose: to tantalize the masses and to further elevate the status of the iced cream among the elite. It reinforces the notion that this is a luxury so profound, so technologically advanced for its time, that it belongs in the realm of spectacle. For the vast majority of onlookers, it remains an unattainable dream, a culinary unicorn glimpsed but never tasted. Historians still argue whether these public displays were primarily marketing tools for confectioners or simply a means for the wealthy to showcase their status and access to novelty. You might notice a few well-dressed gentlemen or ladies, perhaps members of the gentry, approach the stall with an air of knowing sophistication. They might nod approvingly, exchange a few words with the attendant, or even discreetly point out features to their companions, as if to prove their familiarity with such an exclusive item. This subtle performance underscores the social divide, highlighting who is merely observing and who is truly in the know. One quirky tidbit is that confectioners would sometimes employ elaborate, almost theatrical methods for displaying their ice creams using dry ice, if they could procure it from scientific experiments of the era or strategically placed mirrors to enhance the illusion of perpetual coldness and sparkle. This adds to the magic, making the iced cream seem even more fantastical and beyond the grasp of ordinary life. You leave the fair, the image of that shimmering, impossible dessert burned into your mind, a sweet cold phantom that now haunts your dreams of luxury. The seed of desire has been planted, and it will slowly begin to sprout. To understand the public's fascination and indeed the very possibility of iced cream, you must delve into the very heart of cold preservation, the early ice houses. These structures, often unseen by the general populace, were engineering marvels of the 18th century, a testament to human ingenuity in manipulating nature for comfort and luxury. Your modern concept of refrigeration owes its very existence to the principles painstakingly applied in these subterranean chambers. Imagine a large, often brick or a stone structure, sometimes an imposing dome, sometimes a discreet mound disguised as a folly in a grand estate. Below ground, extending deep into the earth, is the main chamber, a large conical or bell-shaped pit. This design was crucial. The cone helped the ice settle, compactly reducing air pockets and directed meltwater away from the main mass. The walls were thick, sometimes several feet deep, and often lined with straw sawdust wood shavings or even charcoal, anything that would act as an insulator. Historians still argue whether the precise insulation material or the depth of the pit was more critical to the ice house's efficiency. You might walk around one of these structures in summer and even feel a distinct chill emanating from it, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. The entrance would typically be a heavy insulated door, often with a long winding passage, to prevent warm air from easily penetrating the main chamber. Inside, the air would be damp, intensely cold, and smell faintly of earth and decaying straw. The process of filling these ice houses was an annual winter ritual. You saw glimpses of the ice harvest earlier, those massive blocks of ice, sometimes weighing a ton or more, carefully lowered into the pit. Layers of ice would be alternated with layers of insulating material, meticulous, packed to exclude as much air as possible. It was a Herculean task requiring dozens of laborers and weeks of effort. The goal was to create a solid monolithic block of ice that would endure through the summer months, slowly melting from the top and sides with the meltwater efficiently drained away from the bottom. The challenges were numerous. A mild winter could mean a poor harvest, limiting the supply of ice for the entire year. Improper packing could lead to rapid melting. And despite all efforts, some melt was inevitable. A truly efficient ice house was a source of immense pride for its owner, a tangible demonstration of their ability to defy the seasons and command resources. One quirky tidbit about early ice houses is that some were fitted with ingenious traps or vents to capture the coldest air at the lowest point, allowing it to circulate naturally and create a self-perpetuating cold sink. This demonstrated an early intuitive understanding of thermodynamics. For the 18th century mind, a well-functioning ice house was almost magical, a place where winter's grasp could be held indefinitely. And without these carefully constructed bastions of cold, the dream of iced cream would have remained just that, a fleeting fantasy. Having mastered the art of keeping ice, the next logical step in the journey of iced cream was to simplify its creation. You now witness the emergence of what were charmingly, if somewhat ambitiously, called cream machines. These were the rudimentary hand-cranked precursors to your modern ice cream makers, designed to make the laborious churning process slightly less agonizing. Imagine a small, perhaps elegant device appearing in a wealthy kitchen. It still relies on the fundamental principle of the double-chambered pot. An inner container for the cream mixture suspended within a larger bucket filled with ice and salt. But the innovation here lies in the mechanism. Instead of a single person endlessly scraping and stirring by hand, a simple crank handle is attached to the lid of the outer bucket. This crank is connected to paddles or a scraper inside the inner cylinder. When the crank is turned, the paddles rotate continually, scraping the freezing mixture off the inner walls of the container and stirring it into the still liquid center. This continuous agitation is vital, precisely what prevents the formation of large icy crystals and helps to incorporate air, leading to a smoother, creamier texture. It's still manual labor requiring consistent effort, but it's a significant improvement over the brute force method of simply stirring with a spoon or a separate tool. You might observe a kitchen maid or a younger footman, perhaps less burdened by sheer brawn than the previous churners steadily turning the crank. Their movements would be rhythmic, almost hypnotic, a testament to the repetitive nature of the task. While easier, it still demands patience and strength, particularly as the mixture thickens and the resistance on the crank increases. Historians still argue whether the invention of these early cream machines truly democratized ice cream production, or if they merely made it slightly more convenient for the already wealthy. These cream machines were often made of pewter or tin, sometimes copper, reflecting their expense and the value placed upon their function. They were not mass-produced. Each was likely crafted by a skilled metal worker, making them expensive pieces of kitchen equipment accessible only to the most affluent households. Owning one was another subtle sign of status, indicating that your household embraced modern conveniences and could afford to indulge in the latest culinary fashions. One quirky tidbit is that some of these early cream machines even came with instructions that emphasize the importance of using freshly harvested ice and the precise ratio of salt to ice, highlighting the delicate balance required for success. This attention to detail underscores the scientific, almost alchemical approach taken to what we now consider a simple dessert. These cream machines, despite their primitive nature, were crucial stepping stones, slowly but surely paving the way for the automated wonders of later centuries and bringing the dream of smooth, delectable ice cream a step closer to reality. With the cream machine diligently churning the focus shifts from the process to the exquisite presentation, you observe the chef's meticulous attention to a question of form. For the elite of the 1700s, ice cream wasn't just a dessert to be eaten. It was a perishable sculpture, a fleeting work of art designed to astonish and delight. This meant moving beyond simple mounds to elaborate, often bizarre molded creations. Imagine the specialized tools emerging from the chef's well-guarded drawer, intricately detailed pewter or tin molds. These weren't your everyday baking tins. They were masterworks of metal craft, shaped like perfect fruits, strawberries, lemons, even whole pineapples, or delicate flowers like roses and lilies. Some were designed to replicate architectural wonders, miniature pagodas or classical temples, sometimes complete with tiny turrets and columns. The ambition of these designs speaks volumes about the desire to elevate ice cream into a truly theatrical experience. The process of filling these molds was delicate. Once the ice cream reached the desired consistency, a soft, pliable state, it would be carefully pressed into the halves of the mold, ensuring no air bubbles. Then the two halves would be painstakingly clamped together, often submerged back into the ice and salt mixture to firm up completely. The moment of truth came with the demolding, a nervous unveiling to see if the delicate form had held, if the details were crisp, if the illusion was perfect. A broken leaf or a smudged petal could ruin the entire effect. You might see the chef, with intense concentration, gently tapping the mold, perhaps running a warm cloth over it for a split second to encourage release. The resulting form, glossy with cold and shimmering with sugar, would then be carefully placed on a silver platter, often surrounded by fresh leaves or real fruits to enhance the deception. The effect was astonishing, a perfectly rendered strawberry that, when spooned, turned out to be cold, sweet cream. This play on appearance and reality was a key element of its allure. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these elaborate molds was a practical solution to serving a melting dessert, or primarily an aesthetic choice driven by the Baroque love of trompe-l'œil. It's clear, however, that the visual impact was paramount. The presentation was as much a part of the luxury as the taste itself. One quirky tidbit is that some molds were even designed to create surprise ice creams, where a different, often contrasting flavor or color of ice cream would be hidden inside an outer layer. Imagine biting into a seemingly plain lemon ice cream only to discover a core of vivid raspberry. This added another layer of playful deception to the already theatrical dessert, showcasing the chef's ingenuity and the host's desire to utterly charm their guests. These molded marvels were not just food, they were miniature edible sculptures, demanding admiration before consumption and cementing ice cream's place as the pinnacle of aristocratic dining. Amidst the wonders of its creation and presentation, a darker undercurrent permeated the early days of iced cream: the fear of poison. In an era before rigorous food safety standards, with rudimentary understanding of hygiene and chemistry, anything novel or unusually prepared was often met with suspicion, and the frozen dessert was no exception. This wasn't just health hysteria, it was a deeper, more primal fear about its very composition. Imagine the common person's understanding of food. Freshness was paramount, and anything that seemed to defy spoilage was inherently suspect. Ice cream maintaining its cold, firm state, even in a warm room for a short time, would seem almost unnatural. Where did this unusual preservation come from? What unseen forces were at play? Without the knowledge of basic microbiology, the public's imagination filled the void with anxieties. You might overhear hushed conversations about the ingredients. Were the cold chemicals used in the freezing process, the rock salt and ice essentially somehow leaching into the cream, was the lead or tin from the molds toxic? While lead poisoning from pewter was a very real concern for many foods and drinks in the era, the direct link to ice cream was often more a product of fear than fact, but the fear was potent. Historians still argue whether instances of illness after consuming ice cream were due to actual spoilage from poor storage or simply psychosomatic reactions driven by pre-existing fears. The exotic nature of some ingredients also fueled paranoia. Remember the rare vanilla, the floral waters, or even the thankfully rare ambergris. These were unfamiliar, sometimes strange substances, and their origins were often murky to the average person. Ignorance bred suspicion. If you didn't know what something was or where it came from, it was easier to believe it might be harmful. You've heard tales of insidious poisons in royal courts, and any new mysterious food could easily be cast as a potential vehicle for such villainy. Furthermore, the lack of immediate spoilage in ice cream, especially compared to fresh dairy, could itself be a source of suspicion. Your understanding is that milk sours quickly, cream spoils even faster. Yet this iced cream remained solid and seemingly fresh for hours. To a mind unversed in the physics of freezing, this could seem less like preservation and more like something inherently unnatural or even magically tainted. One quirky tidbit is that some early recipes actually included warnings about using clean ice and washing the freezing containers thoroughly, indicating that even the chefs themselves were aware of the potential for contamination, even if they didn't fully grasp the microbial reasons. These cautions, however, were often buried in complex instructions and not widely understood by the public. So as you gaze upon that glistening cold dessert, a sliver of irrational dread might accompany your fascination. It looks beautiful, but a nagging voice in your mind whispers, "Is it safe?" The inherent mystery of iced cream contributed not just to its allure, but also to its unsettling capacity to spark genuine fear. Having navigated the fears surrounding its composition, you now observe how iced cream found its footing or stumbled across the various courts and kitchens of Europe. It's fascinating to witness the differing ways in which various nations approached this frozen novelty, leading to distinct cultural comparisons. In its embrace or rejection. The journey from Italy, its birthplace, to the rest of the continent was far from uniform. In France, for instance, the influence of Italian confectioners was profound. The French court, with its long-standing tradition of culinary excellence and artistic flair, often adopted and then refined foreign culinary trends, making them distinctly their own. Ice cream, or crème glacée, quickly became a celebrated dessert in aristocratic circles, often served with an elegance and precision that rivaled the Italians. Parisian cafes, centuries ahead in their public culinary offerings, would even begin to serve early versions of sorbets and sometimes richer ice creams to a slightly wider, though still affluent clientele. You'd find elaborate molds and intricate presentations to be par for the course in a French setting, almost more so than in England. Historians still argue whether France's rapid adoption of ice cream was due to its strong culinary infrastructure or simply the inherent open-mindedness of its fashionable elite. Chacun, across the English Channel, as you've already experienced its reception, was more cautious. The British, known for their love of hearty traditional fare, initially viewed iced cream with a mix of suspicion and novelty. It gained traction through royal endorsement, but its spread was slower, and the initial reaction was often one of surprise rather than immediate unbridled adoration. The British might have admired its ingenuity, but perhaps didn't embrace it with the same gusto or creative flair as their continental counterparts. Their versions might have been simpler, less adorned, focusing more on the novelty of the cold itself. In other parts of Europe, the reception varied wildly. In the Germanic states, with their strong tradition of rich pastries and hearty meals, ice cream was slower to penetrate. While courts eventually adopted it, it wasn't as swiftly integrated into the culinary fabric. Conversely, in regions with colder climates and a history of ice harvesting like Scandinavia or Russia, the concept of frozen desserts might have seemed less alien, even if the sweet, creamy version was new. You might find earlier forms of frozen fruit purees or sweetened snow more readily accepted, paving the way for creamier variations. One quirky tidbit is that in some northern European countries, the word for ice cream often literally translated to ice milk or frozen cream, reflecting a more literal and perhaps less romantic view of the dessert compared to the French bout crème glacée or Italian gelato. This subtle linguistic difference hints at a slightly less enthusiastic, more functional acceptance of the new food. These differing cultural embraces reflect not just culinary preferences, but also broader attitudes towards novelty, luxury, and international influence. For you observing this, it's a fascinating study in how a single innovation can be shaped and reshaped by the distinct personalities of nations. Each country, each court stamped its own unique identity onto the iced cream, slowly transforming a singular curiosity into a European phenomenon. Beyond the cultural nuances of its reception, the single most prohibitive factor determining who could and who could not taste iced cream in the 1700s was its exorbitant chaque cost barrier. This wasn't merely expensive. It was a luxury item that consumed an astonishing amount of resources, placing it firmly beyond the reach of all but the wealthiest elite. Imagine trying to replicate a single batch in your humble 18th century home. First, the ice. Even if you had access to a frozen pond in winter, the effort to harvest, transport, and store enough ice in a rudimentary ice pit to last into summer was immense. That labor, often of multiple individuals, translates directly into cost. Then there's the rock salt, crucial for lowering the ice's freezing point and making the churn truly effective. It was a precious commodity, not cheaply obtained. Next, consider the dairy. Fresh, rich cream was perishable and expensive. You couldn't just pop to the corner shop for a pint. It came from your own dairy herd if you were a landowner or was bought directly from a farm, often at a premium. The risk of spoilage was constant, meaning a large investment could be lost in a matter of hours. And then the star ingredient, sugar. As you remember, refined sugar was white gold, imported from distant, often brutally exploited colonies. A single pound could cost more than a common laborer earned in a week. To make a meaningful quantity of ice cream required pounds of it. Add to this the specialized equipment, the expensive pewter or tin churns, the intricate molds, all crafted by skilled artisans. These weren't items found in a typical household. They were custom-made luxury goods. And finally, the ultimate cost-skilled labor. The chef capable of mastering this temperamental dessert was a highly sought-after professional commanding enormous wages. Their expertise was invaluable, and their time during the many hours of churning and careful preparation was billable. Historians still argue whether the high cost of sugar or the logistical challenges of ice procurement was the single greatest factor keeping ice cream out of reach for the masses. It was likely a devastating 1-2 punch of both. You, a mere commoner, would gaze at a spoonful of iced cream and see not just a dessert, but a condensed symbol of immense, almost unimaginable wealth. It represented global trade backbreaking labor advanced for the time engineering and the exclusive domain of a privileged few. One quirky tidbit is that some early recipes for iced cream actually included cost estimates, which when translated into modern purchasing power, reveal just how astronomically expensive these treats truly were. A single serving could easily equate to a month's wages for an average working family. This wasn't just a dessert, it was an investment, a performance piece, and a clear demarcation of social class. The cost barrier was a formidable wall, ensuring that the delight of iced cream remained almost exclusively in the hands of those who could literally afford to throw money at ephemeral pleasures. From the gilded salons of London, the whispers of iced cream begin their slow, laborious journey. You feel the distance as the concept starts to spread beyond the capital to the provincial towns and country estates of England. This expansion wasn't a sudden surge, it was a gradual, almost hesitant creep, dictated by the limitations of travel communication and, of course, the ever-present challenge of keeping things cold. Imagine the news of this marvel traveling not by telegraph or telephone, but by word of mouth, by letters carried on slow stagecoaches, or by the occasional gentry returning from a season in London. A lady in Bath might hear of it from her cousin who visited court. A lord in Yorkshire might read a fleeting mention in a society gazette. The desire is ignited, but the means to fulfill it are still incredibly scarce outside the capital's immediate sphere of influence. The logistical challenges amplify exponentially the further you move from London. Ice houses become rarer, their construction and maintenance even more of a feat. Skilled confectioners, already a limited resource, are even harder to come by in the countryside. A provincial noble attempting to serve iced cream might have to rely on a local cook with limited knowledge, experimenting bravely with a borrowed recipe, or even sending an urgent, expensive missive to London to commission a specialist chef for a particular event. The quality of the iced cream outside the capital would likely vary wildly. Without the finest ingredients readily available or the constant practice of London's top chefs, batches could be icier, less flavorful, or simply less refined. Yet even a flawed version would be met with immense awe and novelty. For those in a remote estate, a frozen dessert was almost an act of magic, regardless of its precise texture. Historians still argue whether this provincial adoption led to more culinary innovation through necessity or simply to poorer quality reproductions of metropolitan trends. You might witness a country house party where the iced cream is served with immense fanfare, even if the efforts behind it were monumental. The host's pride would be palpable, having managed to recreate a piece of fashionable London in their own often isolated domain. It was a powerful statement of connection to the cultural heart of the nation, a defiance of geographical distance. One quirky tidbit is that some country estates developed their own unique methods of ice preservation, sometimes using deep insulated wells or even repurposing old stone quarries, demonstrating a localized ingenuity in battling the elements for this coveted cold. This self-reliance highlights the extreme measures required to bring this luxury to the farthest reaches of the realm. The expansion of iced cream beyond London was less about culinary accessibility and more about the determination of the wealthy to replicate metropolitan trends no matter the cost or logistical headache. It was a slow drip, not a flood, but each drop chipped away at the solid block of tradition. As iced cream slowly but surely gained traction among the aristocracy, a new character begins to emerge from the periphery of your 18th century streetscape, the rare audacious figure of an bistrot, the iced cream vendor. This wasn't the ubiquitous street vendor hawking hot pies. This was a brave entrepreneur risking immense capital and reputation daring to bring this precarious product to the general affluent public on city streets or in burgeoning pleasure gardens. Imagine the scene: a slightly cleaner, more refined corner of a bustling market, or perhaps a designated spot at a public assembly, like a masquerade ball. You might spot a vendor dressed a cut above the common hawker, standing behind a specially constructed insulated cart or stall. This contraption would be an ingenious if primitive portable icebox, essentially a smaller version of an ice house packed with layers of straw sawdust and, of course, precious ice and rock salt. The sheer bulk of it and the careful attention paid to its insulation would immediately mark it as something out of the ordinary. The vendor wouldn't be shouting their wares like a fishmonger. Their presence would be more discreet, almost dignified. Perhaps a small elegant sign would announce iced cream or creams glacées. They would likely cater to a specific clientele gentry, on a day out prosperous merchants, or those eager to indulge in a fashionable treat, even if it meant paying an exorbitant price. To sell iced cream on the street was a monumental gamble. The product was temperamental, susceptible to rapid melting, and extremely costly to produce. A single warm day or an unexpected delay in transit could ruin an entire day's inventory, turning profit into painful loss. The vendor had to gauge demand perfectly, prepare just enough, and sell it quickly. This required considerable business acumen, not just culinary skill. Historians still argue whether these early street vendors were independent entrepreneurs or simply agents for established confectioners looking to expand their reach. It speaks to the risk-takers of the era. You would see customers approaching cautiously, drawn by curiosity and the novelty. A small, carefully measured portion would be served perhaps in a simple paper cone, a new invention, or a small glass handed over with a ceremony usually reserved for fine jewelry. The transaction itself would feel like an exclusive exchange. The price, of course, would be astronomical for the average person, ensuring that only a select few could partake. Jowly, one quirky tidbit is that these vendors sometimes sold penny ices, very small, often watery portions of fruit ice or sorbet, which were a slightly more affordable, though still a luxury entry point for those lower down the social ladder hoping to get a taste of the fashionable cold. This was their attempt to broaden the market, however incrementally. The iced cream vendor, standing amidst the grime and clamor of the 18th century street, was a harbinger of a sweet revolution, bringing a taste of unattainable luxury just a little closer to the curious masses, if only for a fleeting melting moment. Even with the intrepid iced cream vendor braving the streets, a fundamental enemy persisted, threatening every precious scoop. The melting menace. In the 1700s, without the benefit of continuous refrigeration, every frozen dessert was a ticking clock, a race against the inevitable thaw. This constant battle against melting was perhaps the single greatest logistical challenge, making ice cream a truly ephemeral luxury. Imagine receiving your portion of iced cream. It glistens firm and inviting for a few glorious moments. But almost immediately, the edges begin to soften. The carefully sculpted form starts to lose its crispness. Droplets of condensation form on the outside of the serving dish, then run down, leaving a watery trail. The very air around you, even on a cool day, is a warm, insidious enemy constantly assaulting your frozen treat. There was no freezer to pop it back into, no insulated cooler that could hold its temperature for hours. Once served, it had to be consumed swiftly. Hesitation meant loss, the loss of texture, the loss of form, and eventually the loss of the entire dessert as it dissolved into a milky, sugary puddle. This urgency added a peculiar dynamic to the act of eating it. It was a race against time, a fleeting pleasure that demanded immediate attention. Historians still argue whether the rapid melting of early ice cream contributed to its mystique as a truly luxurious and momentary indulgence, or simply frustrated consumers. The efforts to combat the melt were ingenious, if ultimately limited. Serving dishes were often placed in larger bowls filled with crushed ice. Wealthy hosts might have multiple servants dedicated solely to refreshing the ice around the dessert dishes, constantly bringing fresh supplies from the ice house. At public events, vendors would rush small portions to customers as soon as they were scooped, urging them to consume it quickly. You might see children gobbling theirs down, faces smeared, trying to savor every cold drop before it vanished. The iced cream in this era was a fragile triumph, a temporary victory over thermodynamics. Its very transience added to its allure and its expense. You paid not just for the ingredients and the labor, but for the fleeting magical moment of cold in a world that seldom experienced it outside of winter's brutal grip. It was a tangible representation of seizing the moment, an edible embodiment of carpe diem. One quirky tidbit is that confectioners would often shape early ice creams into very small bite-sized portions or serve them in tall, narrow glasses, specifically to minimize the surface area, exposed to warm air and thus slow down the melting process. This practical design choice, born of necessity, also made the portions feel more delicate and precious. As you take your first eager spoonful, you feel the chill, but also the subtle pressure, the knowledge that this delightful sensation is slipping away moment by moment, melting back into the world from which it was so painstakingly conjured. After all the anticipation, the expense, the social maneuvering, and the battle against the melting menace, the moment arrives when you finally get to try iced cream. But this isn't always the dream you imagined. You might in fact experience a taste of disappointment. A stark reality check that early ice cream was far from the consistently perfect treat you know today. Imagine you're at a slightly less grand affair, or perhaps you've splurged at one of those rare street vendors. You pay your considerable sum, and a small delicate portion is handed to you. You bring the spoon to your lips, ready for the promised marvel. And then, it's not quite right. Perhaps it's excessively icy, a collection of gritty sugar crystals rather than smooth cream. The churning might have been insufficient or the temperature management imprecise. Instead of a creamy melt, you get a somewhat watery, unrefined texture that leaves a lingering sensation of cold grit on your tongue. Or maybe the flavor is off. The rosewater is too strong, cloying, and perfumey rather than subtly aromatic. Or perhaps the cream itself, despite all efforts, was not perfectly fresh, imparting a faint sour note that clashes with the sweetness. Historians still argue whether early consumers were more forgiving of these inconsistencies due to the sheer novelty or if disappointment was a common, if unspoken, reaction. The disappointment isn't just about the taste, it's about the expectation. You've heard the whispers, seen the elaborate displays, understood the immense effort involved. To find the reality falling short of the legend would be a particular kind of letdown. There's no customer service desk for a refund, no guarantee of quality. You've bought into the dream, and sometimes the dream turns out to be a bit of an icy mess. This failure isn't necessarily the fault of the chef or the vendor. It's a reflection of the profound technical challenges of the era. Maintaining a consistent temperature, preventing bacterial growth in perishable ingredients, and achieving perfect crystallization were enormous feats without modern refrigeration and hygiene standards. A slight variation in the purity of the ice, the proportion of salt to ice, the speed of churning, or the freshness of the cream could all lead to a less than perfect result. Schapt. One quirky tidbit is that some historical accounts describe ice cream headaches being far more prevalent and severe with early ice creams, possibly due to their often coarser, more crystalline texture, providing a more sudden and intense cold shock to the palate. So not only might the taste be disappointing, but the physical sensation could be jarringly unpleasant. This taste of disappointment serves as a powerful reminder that progress in culinary arts, like any other field, is built on countless trials and errors on numerous less-than-perfect attempts. It highlights just how far ice cream has come from a temperamental, often flawed luxury to the universally delightful and reliable treat you enjoy today. You finish your portion perhaps with a forced smile, vowing to stick to warm puddings next time, but the memory of the idea of it still lingers. Despite any occasional disappointment when a perfectly crafted batch of iced cream did reach your lips, the experience was nothing short of revolutionary. You are about to undergo a sensory overload. A burst of cold and sweetness utterly unlike anything your 18th century palate has ever encountered. This is more than just tasting, it's a profound shock to your entire system. Imagine the moment you bring the spoon, perhaps delicately molded, into a perfect miniature fruit to your mouth. The first sensation isn't taste, but an intense, almost painful cold. It's a jolt that travels from your tongue through the roof of your mouth and right up into your brain. The infamous brain freeze, amplified by a palate utterly unaccustomed to such frigidity. Your eyes might involuntarily widen, a small gasp might escape your lips. This is a cold beyond that of a winter's day. It's a penetrating, concentrated chill. As the initial shock subsides, the sweetness washes over you. Remember the preciousness of sugar. This isn't the subtle sweetness of baked fruit. It's a direct, unadulterated hit of concentrated sugar, often mixed with the rich, unctuous flavor of pure cream. It's a decadence you rarely, if ever, experienced. Your tongue, typically exposed to savory meats, earthy vegetables, and perhaps some dull puddings, is suddenly alive with this vibrant, almost shocking combination. Then comes the texture when it's good. The smooth, creamy melt contrasting with the initial iciness creates a fascinating play of sensations. It glides across your tongue, slowly yielding to the warmth of your mouth, leaving behind a lingering, sweet coolness. It's a sensory paradox, solid yet melting cold, yet rich, a true marvel. Historians still argue whether the initial brain freeze was a significant deterrent for new tasters or if the subsequent pleasure quickly overcame it. The scent, too, plays its part. If it's vanilla, the warm, exotic aroma mingles strangely with the intense cold. If it's floral, like rosewater, you might feel as though you're eating a solidified bouquet. It's a complexity of sensory input that demands your full attention, a far cry from the familiar, predictable flavors of your daily fare. One quirky tidbit is that some early descriptions of tasting ice cream liken the sensation to eating frozen perfume or drinking solidified frost, highlighting the difficulty people had in articulating such a novel experience. There were no common analogies for something so unique. This wasn't just a new food, it was a new category of sensation, literally redefining what was possible for your palate. You finish the last spoonful, the cold lingering, the sweetness fading, and a profound sense of wonder settling over you. Your culinary world has just expanded in an entirely unexpected, incredibly delicious, and profoundly chilling way. The immediate, exhilarating sensory overload of tasting iced cream for the first time gives way to its subtle yet profound aftermath of indulgence. This wasn't merely the lingering taste, it was a complex interplay of physical sensations, social reflections, and the quiet satisfaction of having experienced something truly extraordinary in your 18th century world. Physically, a distinct chill would settle in your stomach. Having consumed something so intensely cold, your body would react perhaps with a shiver or a sudden urge to wrap your arms around yourself. The natural warmth of your internal organs would be momentarily surprised by this invasion of frigidity. There might be a slight tingle on your tongue, a lingering sense of numbness from the cold, and a residual sweetness that permeated your mouth. You might feel a subtle rush, almost a sugar high from the concentrated sweetness of the rare refined sugar. This wasn't a light dessert. It was a rich, caloric bomb by the standards of your era. Socially, the act of consumption, particularly if it was a success, would elevate your standing, if only marginally. You had partaken in the latest, most exclusive culinary trend. You could now participate in the hushed conversations about its merits, its flavors, its elusive qualities. You had a shared experience with the elite, a fleeting connection to the cutting edge of aristocratic fashion. You might subtly check for any drips on your fine clothing, a small bead of sweat on your brow from the effort of maintaining composure under the shock of the cold. Beyond the immediate, there was a sense of profound satisfaction. This wasn't just food. It was a performance, a spectacle, a triumph of human ingenuity over the limitations of nature. You had witnessed the effort, the expense, the logistical gymnastics required to bring this marvel to fruition. And now it had been a part of your experience. It was a tangible memory of luxury, a story you might recount later to those less fortunate, embellishing the details with each telling. Historians still argue whether the perceived cooling effect of ice cream contributed to its eventual acceptance in warmer climates, or if its luxury status simply overshadowed any concerns about internal chill. It's clear that the sensation was memorable for good or ill. You might find yourself craving its unique coldness again, even as your stomach protests the momentary shock. One quirky tidbit is that some 18th century medical treatises, despite warning against the dangers of cold foods, also noted the agreeable satisfaction or refreshment derived from eating ice and snow, hinting at a subconscious human desire for such sensations despite prevailing fears. This acknowledges the undeniable pleasure that overcame the initial apprehension. The aftermath of your indulgence isn't just a physical feeling. It's a mental imprint, a memory of a unique and deeply satisfying transgression against the ordinary, a brief sweet encounter with the impossible. As the lingering chill of that first taste fades, a new sensation takes hold, an undeniable, almost insatiable longing for more. Despite the cost, despite the inherent risks of consumption, despite any minor disappointments, the unique sensation of iced cream leaves a profound imprint, creating a desire that belies its rarity and expense. Imagine the memory of that intense cold, followed by the rich sweetness playing over and over in your mind. Your palate, once entirely unaccustomed to such a sensation, now recognizes it as something deeply pleasurable, something utterly distinct from any other food you've ever tasted. You find yourself thinking about it at odd moments on a warm afternoon, when a typical glass of tepid water offers little refreshment, or during a dull everyday meal when your mind wanders to that fleeting burst of decadence. This longing isn't just about hunger, it's about novelty and status. You've had a taste of the extraordinary, a glimpse into the lives of the truly privileged. To crave iced cream is to crave a piece of that world, to participate in the most fashionable culinary trend. It becomes a benchmark, a new peak of culinary delight, against which all other desserts now seem to pale. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen. Well, that was a brief fad. This, however, feels different. This feels right. The desire is fueled by its very scarcity. Because it's so difficult to obtain, so expensive, and so temperamental, each potential opportunity to taste it again becomes incredibly alluring. You might find yourself subtly angling for invitations to houses known to serve it, or keeping an ear open for rumors of a new confectioner daring to offer it to a wider public. The challenge of acquiring it only enhances its desirability. Historians still argue whether this intense longing was simply a human response to novelty or if the unique physiological shock of the cold, coupled with sweetness, created a genuinely addictive quality. Regardless, the evidence suggests that once people tasted ice cream, they rarely forgot it and often yearned for another encounter. One quirky tidbit is that anecdotes from the era sometimes describe individuals attempting to recreate the effect of ice cream with simpler, less successful methods, such as eating sweetened snow or placing fruit in cold well water, demonstrating the desperation of the longing. These attempts, while crude, underscore the powerful impression left by the genuine article. Your world has expanded, your palate awakened, and a new desire has been firmly planted in your heart. The pursuit of that cold, sweet bliss has officially begun, and you know deep down that you will seek it out again, whatever the cost. From a fleeting novelty and an exclusive indulgence, iced cream now begins its subtle yet significant transformation. You witness the shifting perception of this frozen treat as it slowly transitions from a bizarre, perhaps even dangerous oddity to a coveted, if still largely inaccessible luxury item. The initial shock and suspicion gradually give way to a grudging acceptance, and then for the elite, a profound appreciation. Imagine the change in conversation. No longer are people merely questioning its safety or its foreignness. Instead, discussions revolve around its quality, its flavor variations, and the skill of the chef who prepared it. It becomes a marker of refinement, a topic for connoisseurship among the fashionable set. The question isn't, what is this strange cold thing, but rather, have you tried Lord Grimsby's peach ice cream? It's simply divine. The fact that it continued to be served, that it didn't cause widespread illness despite the early fears, and that more skilled confectioners were slowly emerging, all contributed to its normalization within the upper echelons of society. Its very persistence proved its viability. The novelty factor, while still present, started to share space with a genuine appreciation for its unique sensory appeal. It was no longer just about the shock, it was about the pleasure. This shift is partly driven by the increased, though still limited, availability of ice and the gradual refinement of churning techniques. As chefs gained more experience and cream machines became slightly more efficient, the quality of the ice cream improved, leading to fewer instances of icy disappointment and more moments of creamy delight. This consistency, however incremental, built trust and solidified its reputation. Historians still argue whether improved taste or continued royal endorsement was the more powerful driver in solidifying ice cream's luxury status. You might see iced cream mentioned more frequently in fictional works of the time, often as a symbol of wealth or a romantic indulgence, reflecting its growing acceptance in the collective imagination. It's no longer just a whispered rumor. It's becoming a fixture in the landscape of high society. People would actively seek it out, not just because it was new, but because it was genuinely desired. One quirky tidbit is that some confectioners began offering subscription services for iced cream, where wealthy patrons could have regular deliveries to their homes, signaling its transition from a special occasion treat to a more integrated, albeit still exclusive part of daily luxury. This move towards regular consumption underscores how much its perception had evolved. From a perplexing curiosity, iced cream was cementing its place as a quintessential luxury eagerly anticipated and deeply appreciated by those fortunate enough to taste its fleeting cold perfection. Its future, though still dimly perceived, was beginning to look very, very sweet. Having witnessed the arduous birth and slow acceptance of iced cream, you now stand on the precipice of a vast, unimaginable future. You gain a fleeting sense of some future foretold, where this humble, temperamental frozen treat will transcend its aristocratic origins and become a global phenomenon, a ubiquitous delight, utterly beyond its modest 18th century beginnings. Imagine, if you can, a world where ice is not a scarce luxury, but is manufactured by the ton effortlessly in every home. Picture metal boxes that keep food cold for weeks on end, humming quietly in every kitchen. Envision giant factories, not just a single chef producing thousands of gallons of ice cream every single day in countless flavors far beyond vanilla or rosewater. You might glimpse vast emporiums bustling with people of all classes, choosing from towering displays of brightly colored, perfectly smooth frozen desserts. Children, not just kings, would casually eat it from cones or simple cups, their faces smeared with delight, without a second thought to its origin or expense. The very idea of anyone not knowing what ice cream is would be ludicrous. This future includes flavors made from fruits from every corner of the globe, from nuts and chocolates, from cookies and candies, all blended seamlessly into a creamy perfection. The texture would be consistently smooth, the melt slow, and controlled a far cry from the gritty, rapidly dissolving concoctions you've occasionally witnessed. The health fears would be largely dismissed, replaced by dietary considerations, but not outright terror of consumption. The ice cream of the future would be available in every conceivable form, scooped into cones, blended into thick drinks, layered into elaborate cakes, or even deep-fried, a concept that would utterly boggle your 18th century mind. It would be a comfort food, a celebration food, a cheap treat, and a gourmet indulgence all at once. Historians still argue whether the invention of the continuous freezer or the widespread adoption of home refrigeration was the single most impactful development in ice cream's democratization. Both undoubtedly were game changers. One quirky tidbit about this imagined future is the concept of ice cream trucks, mobile vendors who play cheerful music and bring ice cream directly to neighborhoods, a delightful and convenient evolution of that precarious 18th century street vendor, but without the melting menace. The notion of ice cream coming to you rather than you seeking it out at immense effort and cost would be truly mind-blowing. You look back at the arduous journey, the ice harvesters, the sugar plantations, the sweating churners, the anxious chefs, the fear of poison. All of it, every challenge, every expense, every precious spoonful, was a tiny step towards this astonishing future. You realize that you've witnessed the very genesis of a culinary staple, a monumental achievement that started with a handful of adventurous souls daring to freeze cream and sugar. The seed has been planted. The roots are taking hold, and the delicious tree of ice cream is about to blossom into an unimaginable forest of frozen delight. As the grand pageant of iced cream through the 18th century draws to a close, you are left with a profound appreciation for its humble beginnings and its monumental legacy. This final act invites you to reflect on the sweet echoes of that first taste, and how its journey from obscure Italian luxury to global phenomenon has forever altered the culinary landscape. Think back to the raw, almost elemental surprise of that initial cold shock, a sensation utterly alien to a palate accustomed to warmth. Remember the sweet intensity of sugar, then a rare and precious commodity, now commonplace. These fundamental sensations, once revolutionary, are the direct ancestors of every scoop you might enjoy today. The echoes of that first tentative spoonful reverberate through centuries of culinary evolution. Consider the sheer audacity of it all, to deliberately freeze something as delicate as cream, to conquer the ephemeral nature of ice, to transform ingredients of immense value into a fleeting pleasure. It was an act of defiance against the limitations of the era, a testament to human innovation and the insatiable desire for new delights. Every ice cream cone, every sundae, every pint in a freezer aisle owes its existence to those early pioneers who risked spoiled batches, social ridicule, and even accusations of endangering health. The story of ice cream is a microcosm of progress itself. It reflects advancements in refrigeration and global trade, in food science, and in social accessibility. It began as a symbol of aristocratic power, a way for the elite to display their wealth and access to the extraordinary. Yet its inherent deliciousness and the relentless march of technology slowly but surely broke down those barriers, bringing it to the masses. Historians still argue whether ice cream's journey from luxury to everyday treat is a unique culinary phenomenon or merely a typical progression for all highly desirable foods. It stands as a powerful example of how what was once unthinkable can become commonplace. You can almost feel the gentle hum of a modern freezer, the smooth glide of a scoop through perfectly churned cream. These are the sweet echoes of those aching arms churning rudimentary machines, of precarious ice houses, and of whispers carried across continents. That journey from a time when consuming frozen cream was a wild, almost dangerous gamble, to an era where it's a comforting ritual, is truly extraordinary. Now, as the flavors and sensations of this historical journey gently recede, let the quiet fade in. Allow the images of cobbled streets and candlelit banquets to soften, blurring at the edges. Feel the warmth of your blankets, the steady beat of your own heart. The grand adventure is over for tonight, but the sweetness, the profound legacy of that first forbidden taste lingers on a comforting hum in the quiet stillness. All the efforts, all the marvels, all the deliciousness are now just a gentle, calming memory. Drift away knowing that even the simplest pleasure has a rich and complex history. Sweet dreams.